I called an old friend before I called my own son. That should tell you something about the day my family finally showed me who they really were, and about the quiet plans I'd been making for 3 years without a single one of them knowing. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 of those years running a small fleet of delivery trucks out of a lot in Ohio, the kind of business you build with your hands and lose sleep over, the kind that puts your kids through college and pays for a house nobody in the family ever thanks you for. I raised one son, Marcus, mostly on my own after his mother passed when he was 14. I taught him to shake a man's hand and look him in the eye. I taught him that a promise was a debt you paid whether anyone was watching or not. I thought I'd done a decent job. For the last year and a half, my son had been quieter with me than usual. The calls got shorter. The visits got rarer. And every time I asked why, he had an answer: ready, work, the baby, his wife's schedule. I told myself that was just what happens. Children grow up, they build their own lives, and their fathers become a name in their phone they mean to call back. I'd accepted that a long time ago. What I hadn't accepted, what I couldn't accept, was going 11 months without seeing my granddaughter Josie. 11 months. I counted every one of them. Josie was 3 when her mother, Vanessa, married my son, and she's 7 now, and in the years between I had become the kind of grandfather who kept a drawer of her drawings in his nightstand. Stick figures, mostly, with her name misspelled in different ways as she learned to write it. The last time I saw her in person, she'd lost her front tooth and couldn't stop showing me the gap, sticking her tongue through it and laughing like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anyone. She told me that when she grew up she wanted a house with a porch swing, like mine, so she could sit outside and watch the rain. I told her she could have my porch swing whenever she wanted it. She said she'd hold me to that. So when the invitation came for her 7th birthday party, hand-delivered by Marcus on one of his rare visits, I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in almost a year. A photograph on the card showed Josie in a yellow sundress, grinning with a new front tooth to replace the one she'd lost. Party at 2 o'clock, it said. A new address I didn't recognize, out past the county line, in a subdivision with a name like something out of a real estate brochure, Whispering Oaks Estates. I didn't ask why they'd moved without telling me. I told myself it wasn't my business to ask. Vanessa had always liked her space from me, and I'd always respected that, even when it cost me. What I did know, because I owned the paper on it, was that the house at that address had been purchased 2 years earlier by a holding company I controlled, and that Marcus had been sending a monthly check to that company ever since, which he believed was a mortgage payment to a bank. I had bought the house as an investment long before Josie was born, back when the subdivision was still just cleared lots and a sign promising a future. My accountant managed the rent collection under the company name, so I'd never have to think about it day to day. I had never once driven out to see it. That was the arrangement, and it had never seemed strange to me until the morning I read that address on the invitation and realized I was about to walk into a house I already owned without either of them knowing it. I decided not to say a word. Let it be my surprise for later, I thought. A funny story to tell Josie when she was older that her grandfather had owned her house the whole time and never said so. I had no idea how much weight that secret would end up carrying by the end of that afternoon. I spent 2 weeks planning her gift, not a toy. I went to the safe deposit box at my bank and took out a ring that had belonged to my late wife, Eleanor, a small sapphire, nothing extravagant, but the one piece of jewelry she'd worn every single day of our marriage until the cancer took her 4 years ago. I'd kept it wrapped in a handkerchief in that box ever since, waiting for the day I'd know it was time to pass it to someone. I decided Josie's 7th birthday was that day. Too young to wear it now, of course, but old enough to be told the story of the woman who wore it, and to understand that she was being given something that mattered more than anything with a barcode on it. I had a small velvet box made for it, and I practiced in the mirror what I'd say to her when I put it in her hands. The morning of the party I ironed my good shirt, the blue one Josie always said made my eyes look like the sky. I was in the driveway by noon, even though the party didn't start until 2, because I couldn't sit in my own house another minute knowing I was about to see her. The drive out to Whispering Oaks took 40 minutes. The house, when I found it, was bigger than I'd pictured from the listing photos I remembered approving years ago. White brick, black shutters, a wraparound porch with actual rocking chairs on it, the kind of house that looks like it belongs on the cover of a magazine about a life you don't quite have. Cars lined both sides of the street for a block in either direction. I could hear a bounce house generator humming from the backyard before I even got out of my car, and over the fence I caught the sound of at least 50 children shrieking with laughter, maybe more. I walked up the driveway with the little velvet box in my jacket pocket, my hand resting over it like I was afraid it might fly away. The backyard was enormous and it was packed. I want to say there were 150 people there, easy parents I didn't recognize, kids from Josie's school, a face painting station, a table of catered barbecue with a line 10 deep, string lights already glowing even though the sun was still up. Vanessa always did love to put on a show. I never held that against her. Said, it wasn't my house, or so I'd let everyone believe, and it wasn't my place to say how anyone spent their money. I scanned the crowd for my son. I found him near the drink table, in conversation with two men in golf shirts, and something about the way he stood shoulders up near his ears, eyes flicking toward the house every few seconds, told me he was carrying something heavy that day. I told myself it was just the stress of hosting. Fathers get like that at their kids' parties. I didn't think much more of it. I wish now that I had. Then I heard the sound I'd been waiting 11 months to hear. Grandpa. Josie came around the side of the bounce house at a dead run, her yellow dress catching the wind, her arms already flung wide before she'd covered half the distance between us. She'd grown 2 inches since I'd last held her. Her hair had gotten longer, and that gap-toothed grin was gone, replaced by a mouth full of new teeth, and somehow that small change nearly brought me to my knees right there on the lawn. 11 months of missed calls and half-answers evaporated in a single second. I dropped to one knee and opened my arms to catch her, my chest already aching with the kind of joy that only grandchildren can put there. She was 3 feet away, 2 feet, close enough that I could see the exact shade of blue in her eyes. The same blue as her father's, the same blue as mine, and then I was flying. I never saw it coming. A hand hit the center of my back with the force of someone who meant it, shoving me sideways and down before Josie ever reached me. My knee buckled on the grass, my hip caught the edge of a folding chair, and I went down hard, the little velvet box flying out of my jacket pocket and skidding somewhere into the flower bed. My glasses came off. The world went soft and blurry the way it does without them. I heard Josie scream my name, heard a gasp ripple through the crowd like wind through a wheat field, and for 3 or 4 seconds I genuinely did not understand what had happened to me. I looked up from the grass. A shape stood over me, hands on her hips, chest heaving. My vision was too blurred to make out her face clearly, but I knew that voice before she even opened her mouth. Stay away from her, Vanessa said. Not shouted, said, low and flat and furious, the kind of fury that had clearly been building for a long time before that moment. You don't get to touch my daughter. Not after everything. Flat. I lay there in the grass of a house I owned, in front of 150 strangers, having just been shoved to the ground by my son's wife 2 feet from the granddaughter I'd driven 40 minutes to hug, and I felt something crack open inside my chest that had nothing to do with my hip. What is wrong with you? And the words came out of me before I even decided to say them, my voice cracking with a rage I did not recognize as my own. 68 years old, and I had never once in my life raised my voice at a woman, never mind my hand. I found my feet somehow, ignoring the fire in my hip, ignoring the dirt on my good blue shirt. Josie was crying now, a few feet away, caught between us, her small hands pressed over her mouth. You don't get to be near her, Vanessa said again, louder this time, loud enough that the whole yard had gone still. I know what you did. I know everything. I had no idea what she meant. I still didn't, not for another 20 minutes. All I knew in that moment was that a woman had put her hands on me in front of my own grandchild, in front of 150 people, on the one day of the year I had been counting down to for 11 long months. Something in me that had stayed quiet and patient and forgiving for 68 years simply broke. My hand moved before I gave it permission to. I felt my palm connect with her cheek, heard the crack of it echo off the side of the house, watched her head snap sideways and her hand fly up to her face. The whole backyard went silent in a way I have never experienced before or since 150 adults and children all frozen mid-motion, mid-sentence, mid-bite, every single eye on the two of us standing in the middle of that manicured lawn. I had never hit anyone in my life. I want that understood. I am not a violent man. I coached Little League for 6 years. I've never so much as raised my voice at a waiter. But I had just been knocked to the ground in front of my grandchild by a woman screaming accusations I didn't understand, and 68 years of restraint left my body in less time than it takes to blink. "He hit me," Vanessa shrieked, cupping her cheek, staggering back a step, tears already streaming too fast, I would think later, too rehearsed to be entirely real. "Everyone saw that. He hit me. Everyone saw that. He hit me." But I watched the faces around that yard, and I understood something in that instant that would matter more than anything else that happened that day. Nobody was looking at me with horror. They were looking at her. A dozen people had seen her cross that lawn and shove a 68-year-old man to the ground before they'd seen anything I'd done in return. I heard a woman near the cake table whisper to her husband. She pushed him first. I saw the whole thing. I heard someone else say, "That poor man didn't do a thing." My son finally moved. Marcus crossed the yard in long strides, his face the color of ash, looking between his wife and his father like a man watching his entire world catch fire in real time. "Dad, Vanessa, what is happening? Somebody tell me what is happening." I didn't answer him. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth again, I was afraid of what else might come out of me. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket for my phone, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock it. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Marcus, who was standing right in front of me. I called Reggie. And Reggie Calhoun had been my lawyer for over 30 years. He'd handled every contract I'd ever signed, every property I'd ever bought, every piece of paper that mattered in my life, going back to before Marcus was even born. He picked up on the second ring, the way he always did, like he'd been waiting for my call his whole career. "Reggie," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need you at a house in Whispering Oaks Estates. Now. And bring the folder, the one on the Cedar Ridge property." That was the name my accountant's holding company had given the address years ago, a name none of them had ever heard, because none of them had ever known I owned it. "Bring all of it." I hung up before he could ask a single question. I knew he'd come. In 30 years, he never once let me down. 30 years. The next 25 minutes were the longest of my life. The party did not resume. Nobody touched the barbecue. 3 children stood frozen near the bounce house, sensing something adult and terrible had happened even if they couldn't name it. Vanessa retreated to the porch, dabbing at a cheek that was, I noticed even through my broken glasses, barely even pink. Marcus stood alone in the middle of the yard, staring at nothing. A man watching his whole life come apart and unable to find the thread to pull it back together. I stood my ground near the flower bed, waiting, my knee throbbing, my dignity in pieces on the lawn along with my glasses, which someone had at least had the decency to hand back to me. One lens cracked straight across. A silver sedan pulled up out front. Reggie stepped out in the same charcoal suit he'd worn to my wife's funeral, carrying a leather folder under one arm, and the crowd on that lawn parted for him without anyone telling them to. He had that kind of presence, the kind you don't argue with. He walked straight to me first, put a hand on my shoulder, looked at the cracked glasses and the dirt on my shirt, and I watched something in his jaw tighten. "You all right, Walter?" "I will be," I said. "Tell them." He turned to face the yard. He didn't need to raise his voice much. The silence did the work for him. "Folks, I apologize for interrupting the celebration," he said. "My name is Reginald Calhoun, I'm an attorney, and I represent the legal owner of this property." He opened the folder and held up a single page, the county seal visible even from where I stood. "This home, and the 2 acres it sits on, were purchased in a private transaction 8 years ago by Walter Danforth. Plus, he nodded toward me, through a holding company. The deed has remained in his name, exclusively, since that purchase. It was never transferred, never co-signed, never gifted. Every payment made on this property for the past 2 years has gone toward rent, not a mortgage. There is no mortgage. There has never been a mortgage." The color drained from Marcus's face so fast I thought he might go down onto the grass the same way I had. That's not, we've been paying the bank. We get a statement every month. It says, mortgage right on it. You've been paying a property management company that answers to your father, Reggie said, not unkindly. The statements were formatted that way at his instruction, so the arrangement would feel familiar. I drafted them myself. End quote. I watched my son's whole understanding of his own life rearrange itself in front of 150 witnesses. I watched Vanessa's face do something else entirely, not shock, not confusion, but calculation, the particular look of someone watching a story they'd been telling for years collapse in real time. "You can't do this," she said, coming down off the porch steps, her voice climbing. "We have a daughter. This is our home." "It was never your home," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my own voice sounded, given how little calm I felt. "It was a house I let you live in while I waited for my son to tell me the truth about why I hadn't seen my granddaughter in 11 months. I kept waiting. He never did. And, Dad, I didn't know any of this. I swear to you, I thought we owned." "I'm not talking about the house, Marcus." That's when Vanessa's face changed again, and this time I recognized the look, because I'd seen it once before in my life, on a business partner who'd been caught skimming from the company years ago. It was the look of someone realizing the walls had already closed in before they noticed the room was small. "Reggie," I said, show him the other file." I hadn't planned to do this in front of 150 people. I want to be honest about that. I had, in fact, been planning to sit my son down privately, sometime that week, and show him what my private investigator, a quiet, careful man named Hollis I'd hired 8 months earlier when Marcus's excuses had stopped adding up, had found. But watching Vanessa put her hands on me in front of my grandchild changed the calculus of what I owed anyone that day, including patience. Reggie handed Marcus a plain manila envelope. Inside were photographs not stolen, not hidden camera footage from inside anyone's home. Nothing that would have made me the villain of this story instead of her. Hollis had done his work the old-fashioned way, from a legally parked car on a public street. Over the course of 6 weeks, photographs of Vanessa's car parked 3 separate afternoons outside a townhouse across town, a man's arm around her waist on a restaurant patio. One Tuesday, when she told Marcus she was at a work conference, a receipt from a hotel 40 miles away with both their names on the guest slip, obtained through a subpoena, Reggie had quietly filed as part of preparing Marcus's own interests, weeks before Marcus knew he'd need protecting. Marcus's hands shook as he went through them. I watched 11 months of distance, of shortened phone calls and canceled visits, suddenly make a terrible kind of sense. Vanessa hadn't kept my granddaughter from me because she disliked me. She'd kept me at arm's length because a father-in-law who showed up unannounced, who asked questions, who paid attention, was a threat to a life she was building behind her husband's back. Every excuse, every rescheduled visit, I understood now they hadn't been about me at all. "How long?" Marcus said, and his voice came out so small I barely recognized it as my son's. "In how long has this been going on?" "Pass that time." Vanessa didn't answer him. She turned instead toward the crowd, tears returning right on cue, and said, "This is insane. This is a setup. He's been spying on us. He hit me in front of everyone, and now he's trying to." "I never touched a camera inside that house," I said, loud enough for every person on that lawn to hear. "Not one. Everything in that folder was taken from a public street by a licensed investigator, and everything in the other folder is a deed with my name on it that's been true since before my granddaughter was born. I'm not the one who's been lying for 2 years." Nobody was looking at her with sympathy anymore. I watched the shift happen across that whole backyard, guest by guest, the way people's faces do when they stop giving someone the benefit of the doubt. A woman near the cake table quietly picked her purse up off a chair. A man in a golf shirt put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and said something too low for me to hear. I walked away from all of it, toward the flower bed, and got down on my aching knee to search through the mulch until I found the little velvet box, one corner slightly crushed but the ring inside untouched. Then I found Josie, who had retreated to the far corner of the porch, knees pulled up to her chest, sobbing in the specific, wrenching way that only very young children sob when the adults around them have broken the world without asking permission. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, lowering myself onto the step beside her, ignoring every ache in my body. "Come here." She climbed into my lap the way she used to when she was 4, burying her face against my shirt. "Is Mommy going to jail?" she whispered. "No, baby. Nobody's going to jail." I didn't know yet if that was true, but it was the answer she needed. "And your mommy and daddy are going to have some grown-up things to figure out. That's not your fault. That, not, and, None of this is your fault. You hear me? She nodded against my chest, still crying, and I held her the way I used to hold her father when he was small and the world had scared him. And I thought, not for the first time that day, that none of this was the birthday I had spent 11 months imagining for her. Eventually, I gave her the ring. Not the moment I'd rehearsed in my mirror that morning. Not with balloons overhead and cake on the table, but sitting on porch steps that used to belong to a party. I told her it had been her great-grandmother Eleanor's, that Eleanor had worn it every day for 40 years, and that someday, when Josie was old enough, it would be hers to wear too. She held the little velvet box very carefully in both hands, like she understood, even at 7, that it mattered more than anything else that had happened that afternoon. Marcus and Vanessa didn't speak to each other again that day, not where I could see. Reggie handled the practical matters quietly. The 30-day notice to vacate the Cedar Ridge property, delivered properly and legally, not shouted across a lawn. I want to be clear that I never had her arrested. Whatever else Vanessa had done, shoving a grown man to the ground was not something I chose to press further than I already had. I'd made my point. I didn't need the county to make it again for me. By the time the last guests trickled out that evening, apologizing awkwardly on their way to their cars, the yard looked the way I imagine a battlefield looks the morning after chairs overturned, cake melting in the August heat, streamers torn down and trampled into the grass, the bounce house slowly deflating in the corner like something that had died. Marcus and I stood in the middle of it together as the sun went down, neither of us saying much of anything for a long while. I didn't know, Dad, he finally said, about any of it. The house, her. I swear to you I didn't know. I believe you, I told him. And I meant it. That's what worries me more than anything else. You didn't know your own life. End quote. We didn't fix everything that night. I won't pretend we did, because that's not how any of this actually works, no matter what the ending of a story might make you want to believe. It took the better part of 2 years, a divorce that dragged through court, custody arrangements that had to be redrawn twice, therapy for both of us that I resisted going to at first because men of my generation weren't raised to sit in a room and talk about our feelings to a stranger, but that I'm grateful now that Marcus talked me into. It took a lot of hard dinners where neither of us knew what to say and said it anyway. Marcus moved into a small place, 15 minutes from mine. Vanessa moved out of state eventually, remarried within a year to a man I've never met and don't care to. She sees Josie 4 weeks a summer and every other holiday, per the court's arrangement, and that's her right, and I've made my peace with it, mostly, on the days I manage to. Josie is 9 now. She lives with her father most of the year, but 3 or 4 nights a week you'll find her at my place after school, sitting on that porch swing she told me about when she was small, the one she said she wanted a house with someday. I never did tell her the swing had been waiting for her the whole time. She wears the ring on a chain around her neck now, too young still to wear it on her finger. But she never takes the chain off, not for swimming lessons, not for sleep. She knows the whole story. I made sure of that, when she was old enough to hear it without it frightening her. She asked me once, maybe a year after it all happened, why I'd shown everyone the photographs that day instead of just talking to her father privately, the way any reasonable person might have. I told her the truth. I told her that for 11 months I had been patient and quiet and understanding, the way I'd always taught her father to be, and that patience had gotten me nothing but a shove in the back on the one day of the year I most needed to be believed. I told her that sometimes the people who hurt you count on your good manners to protect them, and that there comes a day when good manners stop being a virtue and start being a way of letting yourself be erased. I told her that standing up for yourself isn't the same thing as seeking revenge, that revenge is about making someone else hurt, but standing up is about making sure you're never made to disappear again. She still asks me, every year on her birthday now, to tell her the whole story from the beginning, the drive out to the house, the yellow dress, the moment she started running toward me across that lawn. She likes the ending best, she says. The part where I found her crying on the porch steps and didn't leave. I tell her every time exactly the same way. I've come to understand that some stories are worth repeating precisely because they never lose what matters most in the telling. Not the slap, not the lawyer, not the papers or the photographs, none of that. What matters is a little girl in a yellow dress running across a lawn with her arms already open, and an old man who was not, in the end, too old or too tired or too patient to open his arms back.